Today there is some massive changes happening to healers that's going to impact the meta, that's going to impact your performance in raid and Mythic Plus. So let's go and get started. And the first healer we're going to be looking at is going to be Mistweaver Monk. And honestly, there's some really cringe changes here. So the first change that I think is arguably one of the worst ones that I've seen so far is going to be Jade Empowerment now increases crackling Jade lightning damage by 2000% instead of 2500 and cleaves additional targets at 25% effectiveness instead of 15. I don't think Mistweaver Monks needed this change at all. And you can see this graph right now. This is from the Monk Discord. Go check them out, ask some questions and all those things. This is basically indicating how the crackling Jade lightning, Jade Empowerment change is going to impact you depending on the number of targets you're hitting. So basically, this is going to be a nerf when it comes to smaller number of mobs, which in my eyes was absolutely not needed, especially when you look at something like Mythic Plus content where you're facing bosses. So for example, doing the Candle King in Cleft, and then you have this mechanic where you have to get out of melee range. Jade Empowerment, Crackling Jade Lightning comes in kind of clutch. And the fact that Blizzard is nerfing this on smaller number of targets, again, I think this is very, very poor decision making from Blizzard in my opinion. But I don't think the sky is falling. You know why? Because Blizzard tends to change these things if the community outroar is big enough. So share this video or any video that is made about Mistweaver Monk changes, because I am hopeful that this change is going to get reverted because it was absolutely not needed. And outside of that, Shannon's gift healing is increased by 15%, which is fine. Nothing really groundbreaking. Rushing Wind Kick increases renewing mist healing by 200% instead of 150%, which is basically a buff to a build that is utilizing Rushing Wind Kick, which is primarily the raiding Yulon build, which if we look at the raid healing build representation right now, and this is for the mythic version of the raid, and for the first boss, you'll see a lot of Mistweavers are running that Jade Fire Stomp, GG, Jade Empowerment build. For Coljon, it's a little bit of a mixture. For Rick Reverb, a lot of people are running that Yulon build because, again, the intermission phases, you'll see Styx is being dominated by that GG build. You'll see Lock and Stock being a bit of both, again, depending on what your guild needs. One Arm Bandit, a bit of both. And for the last two bosses in terms of Mugsy and Chrome King Gallywix, you'll see that primarily most of the Mistweavers are going to be running that GG build with Jade Empowerment, with Jade Fire Stomp and all those things. There is a decent amount of variety when it comes to Mistweaver Monk raiding builds, and I think it does come down to personal choice, comes down to bosses that have ads, comes down to multiple different things. And I think Blizzard is kind of looking at this and they were like, hey, we want to bring or give additional value to Yulon. Now, they did buff Yulon because they buffed Rushing Wind Kick, and that is looking at a couple of percentage increase when it comes to these situations. But a lot of people, like I mentioned already, are really unhappy about the Jade Empowerment changes. And like I said, make your voices heard, because I genuinely believe Blizzard could revert that change. And now let's go to Holy Paladin. Another week of Holy Paladin buffs. Now keep in mind, these buffs are not as close as impactful as the last set of changes, but buffs are buffs. So Shining Righteousness now requires 4 Shield of Righteous to activate a free Word of Glory or Light of Dawn. Now Shining Righteous is primarily a Mythic Plus talent, in the same way that Righteous Judgment chance increase to 100% used to be 50%. Now, a lot of people were reading Righteous Judgment and they were saying that, hey, I'll never have to cast Consecration again. That's not how that works. You'll still want to cast Consecration because those things stack. In terms of other changes, Veneration now transfers 280% of damage done into healing. Used to be 225%. Now, Veneration is one of those talents that's not really picked up by a lot of Holy Paladins, both in Raid or Mythic Plus content. So the fact that Blizzard is trying to buff underperforming talents, it's very Blizzard. A just reward healing is increased by 80%. Again, this is somewhat niche, and Light of the Martyr no longer transfers overheals into healing absorb. So we're assuming Light of the Martyr still gives you the healing absorb, but the overhealing is not going to contribute to that. We'll have to test that out. So overall, I don't think these are groundbreaking changes, but hey, buffs are buffs, and there's quite a few things here that are aimed at Mythic Plus content as well. So let's move on to the next healer, and now let's move on to the big changes. And Discipline Priest, I think everyone has been following the meta right now. They're kind of aware of the fact that Oracle Discipline Priest has been overperforming in possibly most of the content out there, especially in Mythic Plus, where the representation of healers when it comes to Oracle Discipline Priest was insanely skewed towards this spec. So overall, developers note Discipline Priests are performing beyond where we would like them to be, so reducing the impact of the Power Word, Shield, Penance, and Atonement throughput. And I think some of these changes are going to confuse a lot of people, but I'm going to try and dissect them. And first of all, Wheel and Woe now increases the Absorb a Power Word Shield by 5% per stack, used to be 10%. Now, this is probably the most anticipated change because I think Wheel and Woe was one of the offenders in terms of making Oracle Discipline Priest extremely strong, specifically in Mythic Plus content. Let's talk about it. Now, what you see right now, this is my Oracle Discipline Priest, and if you've been playing this spec in Mythic Plus content, you're fully aware of the shield bot mentality where you're pressing your penances, and those penances are going to give you 7 stacks of Wheel and Woe, which is going to increase the power of your next shield. Now, there are a couple of other talent builds floating around in terms of picking up Harsh Discipline, and with this, after you use your Radiance, you can use your Penance, and that's going to give you a full stack of Wheel and Woe, which is going to increase, you can see here, the absorb of your next power word shield is increased by 80%. They're halving this. So this is going to be, again, depending on your playstyle, and this is the playstyle of using Penance and then using shield, if you've been optimally playing your Oracle Discipline Priest, this is nerf to your shielding capabilities. But honestly, you have to look at the original values of these shields and how overpowered shielding is for Oracle Discipline Priest. It's still clear to me that Blizzard wants Oracle Discipline Priest to retain that niche. Honestly, I was half expecting that Blizzard is going to completely annihilate shielding and then buff other aspects of Oracle Discipline Priest to compensate. Outside of that, penance damage and healing has been reduced by 15%, which honestly just sucks regardless of which build you're playing, because this is going to reduce your throughput as a Discipline Priest. And then there has been atonement changes. Now, if you're a Mythic Plus only Discipline Priest, you don't have to worry about this because basically they reduced your atonement, specifically in Raid, and then they gave you compensation buffs to Mythic Plus. So they're trying to equal out the changes. Now, historically speaking, just like the Mistweaver changes that happened last time, they nerfed Mistweaver damage and then they had to give compensation buffs to Ancient Teachings. They always end up being like a minuscule nerf, even with the compensation buffs. But for the simplicity's sake, if you're a Discipline Priest who focuses on Mythic Plus, you don't have to worry about these atonement changes too much. If you're a Discipline Priest who's been playing in Raid, well, your atonement transfer is basically getting nerfed by 12.5%. And we'll talk about that. And outside of that, you also see Void Weaver, Void Blast damage is increased by 10%. So this is obviously trying to buff off Void Weaver. And let's talk about some of the logs and how this is going to impact you as a disc player. And just to quickly showcase what is happening in Mythic raiding, this is the HPS logs, and you can see Discipline Priest, or specifically Oracle Discipline Priest, is meta in raids, and it's also meta in Mythic Plus content, and Blizzard is nerfing your atonement transfer, which is specific to raid, by 12.5%. Again, atonement transfer doesn't account for all of your healing, but you're also getting hit with penance nerfs, and you're also getting hit with Wheel and Woe nerfs. So let's look at random logs when it comes to Oracle Discipline Priest in raiding content. And you can see here, this is lock and stock. Atonement does make up for a large portion of your healing, which is getting nerfed in raid content specifically. You'll see that Power Word Shield does not play as big of a part in raid versus Mythic Plus. So that's important to remember. But you do have, or a lot of people will spec into Wheel and Woe, so we'll have to account for the fact that that's also getting a nerf. Penance is also getting a nerf. So there is going to be significant nerfs to Discipline Priests when it comes to raiding content, and you most likely won't see this graph. We'll talk about this in raid, but Blizzard is literally trying to even this out. But what about Mythic Plus? And this is a random log for a plus 17 Floodgate in terms of Oracle Discipline Priest, and you can see shielding makes up a huge portion of your overall healing, and I'm assuming a good portion of this, or these shields, are also going to be buffed by a Wheel and Woe, which is getting a significant nerf. Now, the atonement transfer nerfs are bigger in raid than they are in Mythic Plus. In Mythic Plus, they try to even them out, but you also have to look at the penance nerfs in terms of damage and healing. So I definitely think as an Oracle Discipline Priest, you're going to feel these changes. We'll talk about this in the raid and Mythic Plus section at the end of the video. You can check out the chapters if you want to jump to that straight away. Let's talk about the next healer. And now let's talk about Holy Priest changes and more buffs. I genuinely think that Blizzard looked at the last set of changes and they looked at the healer performance in raid and they were like, Holy Priest is still at the bottom. They need something more. I genuinely think they look at the charts and they base their decisions based on that. But Holy Nova damage is increased by 30%. Prayer of healing is increased by 15%. I genuinely would like to see the exact percentage buffs that Prayer of Healing has received since PTR, because it's an ungodly amount. Prayerful Litany causes Prayer of Healing to heal its primary target for 125% more versus used to be 75%. And Prayer of Healing mana cost is reduced by 10%. Prismatic Echoes increases Echo of Light healing by 815 instead of 5 or 10, and Renew healing by 2040 instead of 1530. So this is a buff to this talent. And outside of that, an overall healing increase by 3%, which again is nice. We'll talk about this in the Raid and Mythic Plus section. And there's been buffs to Oracle. Twin Sight now applies 4 stacks of Prayer Mending instead of 2. And I think this is very interesting because Blizzard is trying to make Oracle more of a thing for Holy Priest, which I think is fantastic because there's so many other healers who are still, again, I'm talking about Resto Shaman here, who's still kind of stuck with like majority of Resto Shamans are going to be playing a singular hero build. And I think the fact that Blizzard is trying to make multiple hero builds viable for Holy, they should apply the same logic to Resto Shaman, but I'm going on a tangent. In the summary of Holy Priest changes, well, they seem to be quite impactful because they open doors for another possible raiding build for Holy Priest using things like Oracle alongside Archon, so you'll have multiple different options. So while playing this Oracle build, it's possible you might be making use of talents like Prayer of Healing or Prismatic Echoes, basically some of the talents that have been buffed recently. So guys, let me know how you feel about the possibility of multiple different builds available in raid depending on situations, and which build are you gravitating towards. And when it comes to Restoration Shaman, the changes here, Farseer Ancestor Lava Burst damage is increased by 15%, and all of a sudden Farseer Ancestor Elemental Blast damage is also increased. Resto Shamans have gotten a new ability, and wow, this is pretty great. I'm kidding, of course. They literally just copy and pasted the elemental notes to Restoration Shaman, which is honestly in line in terms of how much effort they put in terms of these changes for restoration. When it comes to Farseer Resto Shaman, again, I'll take the damage buffs, but I think there's so many different things that Blizzard could address. A lot of people have been talking about the healing rain interaction in terms of Farseer. Is it fun to press? Is it fun to use, especially because the tier set promotes it? I'm kind of sick of talking about this because I've been saying this every single video when it comes to Farseer Resto Shaman. I really want to know your opinions, especially considering the fact that majority of Shamans are playing Totemic, and I think Blizzard, it's clear from these changes that Blizzard wants better balance when it comes to hero talent representation, but at the same time Blizzard is not doing enough to make Farseer more attractive to swap to, especially considering that it's been like this for the last 2 seasons. So let's talk about how these changes are going to impact these numbers. We're looking at Mythic 75 percentile here, and you can see Discipline Priest. We talked about this in the Dis Priest section. They're dominating, and they are getting a substantial nerf. They're getting a 12.5% Atonement nerf, which is specifically for raid content. They're getting a nerf to Penance, they're getting a nerf to Wheel and Woe, and you will see Discipline Priest HPS numbers be more in line with everyone else. This is basically what Blizzard is trying to do. They're looking at this chart, or this exact chart, and they're like, hey, how can we make this closer with everyone else? And I think they've been doing a good job, because last week Holy Paladin was really down. They gave a substantial buff, and everything is looking a lot closer if you look at pure HPS. In terms of other healers, Resto Shaman didn't really receive any HPS changes. Mistweaver Monk, honestly, I'm not sure what's going to happen to Mistweaver Monk right now, because there is a different builds floating around in terms of Yulon. Yulon received a buff. In terms of Chi G, Jade Empowerment build, depending on how you utilize it, depending on how many mobs there are on certain raid bosses and things like that. Honestly, it might change, it might not. It really just depends on the representation numbers, depending on the different builds and things like that. At the end of the day, Jade Empowerment changes are absolutely cringe. Make your voices being heard, because I still think they can revert that. The rest of Druid received no changes. Holy Paladin received buffs, but a lot of them are a little bit of quality of life or aimed at Mythic Plus content. I don't think they're going to fluctuate all that much. Preservation of Evoker received no changes whatsoever, and Holy Priest received buffs. They received 3% overall healing buff. They received buffs to some of the underperforming talents. There's been buffs to Oracle and things like that. So I'm expecting Holy Priest to be more in line with everyone else, and Discipline Priest to fall back in line with everyone else, which again is literally what Blizzard is trying to do when they look at these charts. And now let's talk about the big one, and that is Mythic Plus balance. And we're looking at this week in terms of week 6. Average key level is almost like 15, 16. So people are pushing keys right now. There's still item level to achieve. So item level is going to be increased. Keys are going to be increased. Oracle Discipline Priest nerfs. Is it dead? Is it meta? Is it still good? My honest prediction, I don't think Oracle Discipline Priest is dead. I think the Wheel and Woe nerfs are going to be felt, but you still have shields. You have to remember, shielding is still a really good way of increasing your group survivability. I still think that priest utility this season is more relevant than ever, because as a priest you provide things like, for example, Master Spell. There's so many magic debuffs out there. You provide PI, which has always been great pretty much. You provide things like Mind Suit, which I think this season is a huge quality of life, and I think you won't realize how strong you can be unless you start pushing certain keys in your like, we need Mind Suit for this. I almost feel like Mind Suit should be a consumable at this point, but that might be a controversial opinion, and obviously things like Fortitude, but at the end of the day, Shadow Priest is not all that great, so I think a lot of groups will try their best to keep a priest in their comp. Now, when looking at Oracle, Discipline Priest, and Throughput, we already looked at those sample logs. You can go back to the Discipline Priest section and things like that, but shielding is going to account for a big portion of your healing. A lot of that shielding is also going to be buffed by Wheel and Woe. We talked about this, that's going to be halved, so your shields are going to be less powerful, but again, shielding is still relatively strong. It still gives survivability to your group and all those things. Penance nerfs are going to be really, really annoying. I think you're looking at a similar season to what happened in Dragonflight, where Discipline Priest was brought to really high keys, but you also had Augmentation of Evoker to help Discipline Priest meet those healing checks. You don't really have that in the War Within, and I genuinely believe there will be certain bosses, certain dungeons, where Oracle Discipline Priest is going to struggle to meet some of the healing checks. Because again, you don't have the old version of Augmentation of Evoker to help you like you did in Dragonfly. If you want some examples of these insane healing checks right now, you're talking about Candle King and Cleft, you're talking about Swamp Pass and something like Floodgate, and I think there could be certain challenges faced after these changes. I don't think this is the end of Oracle Discipline Priest. I still think there's going to be a lot of people pushing as Oracle Discipline Priest. I believe that people who swapped over to Oracle because it's so, or at least was extremely overpowered, I think those people are going to be swapping back to their, again, comfort picks. But I think the hardcore Oracle Discipline Priests are going to make this spec work. But at the end of the day, I don't expect to have this egregious healer representation in the future. I think there will be, like I mentioned already, Flavor of the Month rerollers who swap back from Oracle Discipline Priest to their comfort picks. In terms of other healers that I think are really enjoyable and really powerful, and to some extent underdogs right now, I think Resto Druid, if you've been pushing high keys, you have the tier set, you have good gear, you're probably fully aware of the amount of, or how easy it is to meet healing checks, especially with the bosses that I mentioned already. So at the end of the day, I think Resto Druid, the fact that Balanced Druid is still so strong, it's really not helping their cause. Resto Shaman has been climbing a little bit as well, which is nice. Mistweaver Monk changes to Jaina Powerband, super cringe, especially when it comes to Mythic Plus content. I really hope they're going to revert that. Holy Paladin changes, again, a lot of them were focused on Mythic Plus or buffing talents that are popular in Mythic Plus. Holy Priest buffs I think are nice as well. Preservation of Evoker didn't really get touched. So I don't think this is going to be the representation in the next coming weeks. I don't think Oracle Discipline Priest is dead. I think there's still going to be a lot of players making it work, but I definitely think there will be better balance. But I'm really hoping you're watching this section right now, because this chart does not represent the true capabilities of each healer, especially considering the fact that Oracle Discipline Priest or Discipline Priest is getting nerfed. I genuinely think this has the possibility of being one of the best healer balance seasons in World of Warcraft. I could see any healer coming into this meta depending on what they provide, but there's always going to be one. There's always going to be a snowball effect. But I genuinely think you could play or pick up any healer right now and do high Mythic Plus keys if you know how to play them, which honestly is a great thing that this graph does not showcase. So guys, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the content. Let me know which healer you're pushing Mythic Plus. Let me know which healer you're playing in raid content. Let me know which changes you really want to see for your spec in order to make it more fun and things like that. Guys, have a good day, and I'll see you in my next video.